So we had some big news break in the NFL in the past hour. Here from Ian Rappaport, who says Seahawks star wide receiver DK Metcalf has requested a trade from Seattle, and the team has decided to explore it per me and Tom Pelissero. There is likely to be significant interest in the Seattle star, and both sides will dig into it, a big-time wide receiver who may be on the move. So last week, I broke down the conflicting reports that came out regarding DK Metcalf and the Packers. And there was one report saying that the Packers have an offer on the table for DK Metcalf. There was another report saying the Packers have not had discussions with the Seahawks. So hard to know exactly, what the case is. But now that DK has officially requested a trade, the question is, should the Packers aggressively pursue a trade with the Seahawks for DK Metcalf? I think when you look at the situation, there's no doubt there are a lot of wide receiver needy teams in the NFL, teams that don't have a lot of great options at the current time on their roster. And so I think that those teams are definitely going to be more willing to spend up in a trade for DK Metcalf. Where it gets interesting is DK Metcalf only has 1 year left on his current deal. And so if you're going to trade somewhat significant draft capital for him, you have to be pretty confident that DK Metcalf wants to be on your team for the long haul, because I don't see a team willing to trade, let's say, a second-round pick if you don't know for a fact that DK Metcalf will agree to an extension, with your franchise. Because to give, let's say, a second or a first-round pick for DK Metcalf for 1 year, obviously that's a massive overpay in my mind. And so that's one thing to watch, because whatever team brings him in is likely going to want to sign him to an extension. And so when we look from the Packers' perspective, Gute, when you look at the past, how he's ran the Packers up to this point, they've never really gone out to make big moves at receiver. If anything, they've done the opposite, trading away Davante Adams for a first and second round pick a few years back. Now, at that time, the Packers had offered Davante Adams a contract, but he wanted to go play for the Las Vegas Raiders. So it's not that they didn't want Davante, it's just that he decided to go elsewhere. The Packers were willing to pay Davante more than the Raiders were willing to pay. So when we look at the Packers' history with Brian Gutekunst, you look at some of the free agent signings at wide receiver in the past, guys like Randall Cobb coming back when Rodgers wanted him, Sammy Watkins, Devin Funchess, not really any massive big-time receiver signings. So I'm just not convinced that Gutekunst is going to outbid every single other franchise that really wants DK Metcalf. And if that report is true that the Packers did offer, place an offer or present an offer for DK Metcalf, then I do wonder exactly what that would be. Now, thinking of what I think would be the right value for DK Metcalf, he's 27 years old, going to be 28 next December. So I think he's still in the prime of his career. I'd say he probably has a few years left in his prime. And so you're getting a very young receiver, which when you look at the free agent market, there's not a lot of receivers at that age who are available, because typically, they get paid by their franchises. And so on that hand, he's someone that's probably going to make, I assume if he gets extended, somewhere in the $25 to $35 million range, definitely that top tier range. I'm just not convinced that Gutekunst is going to outbid someone and then pay DK Metcalf exactly what he wants. It could happen if the offer was on the table. I wonder what it was. Maybe it's something like a third-round pick. I think for a third, I think that's a reasonable, draft pick to send away for DK Metcalf. I think anything higher than that, maybe a second is okay. Definitely not a first. I think a second is the highest I'd want to give for DK Metcalf, because you're going to have to pay him a lot of money. And Brian Gutekunst has also said that when you look at teams who end up being, having the most success, lots of times they don't end up having, a ton of the targets, or there isn't a receiver on the team that ends up having a majority of the targets, or like a heavily targeted wide receiver. So just from his comments, I'm not convinced he's going to go all out to try to acquire DK Metcalf. I think that there are other teams that are probably willing to outbid the Packers for DK Metcalf. And if you're the Seahawks, you're probably going to take the best possible offer. But a team isn't going to want to trade for DK if he doesn't want to play there. So just as with Davante Adams and the possibility of him coming to Green Bay, there's a lot of different options for the Packers if they want to, boost their wide receiver room. You can sign a guy like Davante probably for cheaper than DK. you don't have to trade for him, and he's going to be cheaper. But of course, he's older, so you're not going to have more of a long-term answer. Now, if you trade for DK Metcalf and you extend him, you do have that long-term answer. So there are some things that could be pretty enticing for DK to come to the Packers. And when you look at him, he has that deep threat ability, that deep speed. He's incredibly fast. He could fill the hole that Christian Watson is going to create with him being injured until he comes back. So he would fill that role. He's not as good as a contested catcher as Romeo Doubs. Last year he was pretty poor in that area. So he's definitely not a perfect receiver. This isn't like a no-brainer, easy decision, I think, based on the pay how much you're going to have to pay him and the draft capital you have to give over. But I do think he would add aspects to this team that could make the offense better. The deep threat, he's great after the catch, really talented receiver, and he would definitely make the Packers better. So for me, when it comes to all these receiver options, I think that a lot of them could make sense. Devontae at the right price, fine with me. DK Metcalf for a reasonable, maybe I'd say at most a second-round pick, and then paying him, I'd be fine with that. But I'm just not personally convinced that Gute is going to do it. So this is one to keep an eye on, because now with him officially requesting a trade, I assume that the Seahawks will be in conversations with lots of different teams around the NFL. That's all I have for now. If you want more Packers content, Packers news, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.